Bhavesh, let's go back to, given the complexity, the FDA went through a pretty elaborate process to determine approvals. And taking what Michael just said in mind, taking the prior comments you made, do you have comfort in that process and that the FDA is using? And do you think, the extent that you have comfort, do you think that's easy to share with clinicians who don't have that kind of pharmacology background?
Yeah, I think, and this is where pharmacists really play a huge role, because we understand a lot of the structural, the pharmacokinetics, the pharmacodynamics, the similarities that you see between that, the process that the FDA has established, looking at a biosimilar versus a reference product. You have to have the primary structure, which is the amino acids, the secondary structure, and even the tertiary structure. There has to be similarities that it has to be established before they actually move on to the next stage, which has to do with the pharmacokinetics. You're looking at Tmax, Cmax, AUC. All of these things have to be pretty much similar to the biologic reference product, and if it's not, then it can't move on to the next phase of the FDA process in approval. So I think that it is a well-established process, and just knowing the fact that we are a little bit behind compared to our European colleagues, right? They have over a decade of experience with these agents in practice. So there's well-established safety and efficacy of these drugs across the waters.
And so that efficacy is an important issue for biosimilars. The number of large studies done in this country are fewer, but the number in oncology are really quite few, even across the pond. Most of that experience seems to be in the EU is really around the drugs that have been used in the rheumatologic population. In this country, other than filgrastim, all the others seem to be, and I don't know if there are 7 or 9 now that have been approved, but it seems that all those approvals have not necessarily resulted in market availability and market access. So, Bhavesh, from your perspective, if we focus a little bit on the oncology, what do we really have now in terms of available biosimilars in the market in the immediate term and in the near term? And give me some thoughts about the data that supports their efficacy.
Sure. So, looking at the oncology landscape for biosimilars, we have 5 trastuzumab biosimilar molecules. We have 4 pegfilgrastim biosimilar molecules. There's 2 rituximab molecules for biosimilars, and then there's 2 bevacizumab molecules. And of course, there are more biosimilars coming for each of these other agents. So we anticipate that that's going to continue to go up. And in terms of efficacy, I think that it all depends on the drug and the indication that you're testing in. So for example, pegfilgrastim, as you know, the FDA didn't actually need for that molecule to be tested in patients with chemotherapy-induced neutropenia for it to be approved. They actually had a very, a great structural, functional comparison, which showed that this was really highly similar. And basically they had the studies done in healthy subjects, and which makes sense if you're thinking about looking for immunogenicity. You want to look for it in patients who are not getting chemotherapy, which could blunt the immunogenicity signals that you're looking for. So there's a well-established process in oncology where the FDA, kind of decides on where you need to test these drugs for and what indications are more sensitive, and how the trials need to be designed.
So Michael, I want to bring you back in because given all the biosimilars that are going to be entering the oncologic market, it brings up lots of interesting questions, I think, for the oncologist who may be prescribing them. And one is, are they too late? Many of these drugs are the reference brands for these drugs are already experienced competitors that may be called next generational. And so we clearly are seeing that with regard to some of the products, whether it's Gazyva as next generational to rituximab, and clearly we could argue the same with others. And then we have questions about as we're moving into cell and gene therapy and immuno-oncology and a greater amount of targeted therapy, it feels like the monoclonal antibodies almost are kind of in a prior generation. So I'm curious where you see the current environment. We have filgrastim, we're waiting for pegfilgrastim, but pegfilgrastim now, to a large extent, is delivered via Onpro. And so we have a delivery device which is patented and is not being copied by the biosimilar. So there is that kind of, is it too little too late phenomenon. And I'm curious where you think about that. It's because it sounds like a lot of drugs and a lot of opportunity, but where do you see as that reality check?
You know, and that's a very good question. They've had biosimilars available in other countries for many, many, many years. Where the U.S. is a little bit late to getting to this market compared to others. But I look at biologics as something as being here to stay for some time. There are so many different disease indications. There are so many unique disease indications that it would still take many, many, many years to find an equivalent or better substitute for the a lot of the biologics that we have. And you also have to look at it from a couple of other perspectives. As with newer medications, as they come out, they tend to be a little bit more economically costly. And so if you can achieve the same thing with a lesser expensive product, then I think we owe it to society to make the best use of our resources and, you know, use the lesser expensive product if we can. So, you know, we could have used them a long time ago, but I think there's a lot of advantages that we can take, that we can use in order to treat patients, to make sure that all patients are getting, having access to appropriate medical care, good quality medical care, and which is also economically reasonable as well. So I don't think that it's too late. I think that it's better late than never. It's one of those situations. And I think that we need to continue to evolve our use of biosimilars, you know, as much as we can and try to integrate them into our practice and care of patients as medically responsible.